Change isn't scary. What a concept, right? As I was preparing for my talk today, it dawned on me that that is something I have lived with. The fact that change is not a scary concept to me for as far back as I can remember. It really has become a fabric of my being, a part of who I am. So in order for you to understand why that is, let me take you back in time and share with you a little bit about my background. And I'm going to channel, for those of you who, like me, love the Golden Girls. Anyone? One of my favorite shows. And my favorite character is the feisty Sophia Petrillo. If you know me, you know why I like her. She's from Sicily, and her tagline, whenever she's going to tell a story about the old country, is for you to picture this. So, in order for you to travel back in time with me, I invite you to picture this. El Salvador in 1968. El Salvador is a tiny, tiny country on the Pacific Ocean in Central America, and it's where I was born. In 1968, I was 1, and my father, a man with a 5th grade education, had risen through the ranks at the factory where he had worked and had been asked by his boss to come to this very city, to visit Chicago, to tour a plant here, and come back to El Salvador with some ideas on improving the plant down there. So he did, dutifully went to the U.S. Embassy in San Salvador. When he got there, he saw a friendly face, a young secretary who worked in the embassy. She approached my dad, they chit-chatted for a little bit, and she asked him, "Paco, are you here for that program?" In Spanish, of course. And my dad said, yes, thinking that that program that she was referring to was the tourist visa program. And she said, "Well, then you're in the wrong line." And she guided him to a different line. And at that moment, everything changed for us. Because as it turns out, that program to which she was referring was not the tourist visa program at all. It was a new immigration law that had been passed in 1965, a date we keep hearing over and over today. It was a law that had been passed, signed by President Johnson, as you see in this picture, and it changed everything in terms of how immigration worked. And my father, having gotten in the wrong line, improbably, miraculously, and wonderfully for me, actually got permanent residency and moved to San Francisco in 1968. Based on that and on so many other millions of families who are like mine, I would say that President Johnson's prediction turned out to not be correct. So he arrives in 1968 in San Francisco, not speaking English, knowing very little about American culture, but like a good immigrant, hungry and wanting to live the American dream for himself and for his children. So for 2 years, still not exactly sure how he was able to do it, the man was brilliant. He learned English, he learned a lot about America, its culture, its customs, but the most important thing that he did, from my perspective, is he applied for and obtained permanent residency for the rest of his family. Myself, my 2 older sisters, and my mom arrived in San Francisco in February of 1971. How cute was I? Seriously. That's me on the bottom there, 3 years old when I arrived. And better than that picture, those boots, right? Pretty cool. So that's us in the 70s. I tell you this story for a couple of reasons. The first is that I truly believe, and if there are any authors in the audience, tell me, because I think that my family's immigration story is one of the greatest immigration stories I've ever heard. My father got in the wrong line. It's the working title for my autobiography, really. But that's the reason we're here. It's an extraordinary story. But I also share this story with you because in other ways, it's ordinary, meaning each one of us in this room has a moment in time where something happened that changed everything, that altered the path that we were on previously. I also tell you this story because I think my personal story of my family, the way that I was raised, connects so well, so easily to the concept that we're talking about today. Not just change, but how to handle it, what attitude to have about it, to hone your skills, to be change agents, and to really be adaptable. So I'll tell you a couple more stories that I think will bring that point home. There's my mom and dad getting married. and a couple of lessons that they really instilled in me and my brother and my sisters that, again, have made us, from my perspective now, more like Sniff and Scurry, the mice in the story that Jim started out with, able to really quickly and adeptly adapt to change, and really without even thinking about it. So the first lesson that my parents taught us, now that I think back on it, is that embracing the new and the unknown is just part of life. They did it in a couple of different ways. The first thing they obviously had to do when they came to this country was learn how to speak English. So my father had already learned it pretty well by the time we arrived in the United States, but as you can imagine, he spoke with a very heavy accent. So he would sit me down sometimes and say, "All right, honey, there are some particular words that are really difficult for me, so can you help me?" "Sure, Dad." And the one, for any of you who speak Spanish or any other language, one of the ones that was particularly difficult for him was the RL sound. So we would sit in front of each other, and I'd look at him intently, and I'd say, "All right, Dad, girl." And he'd look at me just as intently and say, "Girdle." Let's try again, Dad. "World." "Whittled." It became a lifelong joke between us that he would pronounce it that way. That really was the way he pronounced it, but he tried, and he did speak English actually very, very well. With my mom, the story was a little bit different. I don't know if this exists anymore, but back when we were growing up, we used to have adult schools at the local high schools. And my mom would go there to learn English. And if any of you have ever seen the movie Stripes, you probably will appreciate the way that this teacher taught my mom to speak English. It was through song. So she would walk around the house singing all the songs that she learned from her teacher. And to this day, if I have to hear Freddie Fender's "I'll Be There Before the Next Teardrop Falls" one more time, I don't know what I'm going to do, because that was apparently the teacher's favorite song. So she can sing those lyrics very, very well. So these were just some of the things that they embraced. But they did something else, and that is that they inspired us to embrace it as well. My father arrived in the United States not being a particularly big sports fan, but the minute he heard that baseball was the national pastime, he didn't become a baseball fan, he became a baseball fanatic, because he knew that that was a way of embracing the culture. But he did something else. He passed that fanaticism down to me. I became a huge, huge baseball fan from the time I was little, so much so that for those of you who follow the 1970 Cincinnati Reds, my son's name is Tony Perez, on purpose. That's a baseball fan. That wasn't even my favorite team. So this idea of embracing the new and the unknown, I realize, is just something that I've lived with all my life. Another great picture of my parents getting married. Courage and vision, other concepts that my parents instilled in me from the very beginning that, again, translate back to this idea of change, this idea of embracing that change, choosing to be the mice, or at the very least, the little person who immediately or slowly but eventually chooses to accept change rather than him who never does. So the courage that it took my parents to leave family, country, friends, language, and arrive in the United States during a time when there were almost no Salvadorans here is unthinkable to me. I cannot imagine the courage that took. But what I do understand, especially now that I'm a mom myself, is that it was all because of a vision. My father in particular always had the vision that he came to this country to provide us, his children, with the best opportunities. One of the things that we say about my dad, and again, he passed it down to us, is he didn't teach us to drink the American dream, we guzzled it, and we still do. But he did something else. He knew that for us to be whole, it didn't mean that we rejected our roots. So just as fiercely patriotic and proud immigrants as we were and are now, we also still hold on to some of our roots. So I think about the vision that he had. Who would have thought in the 1970s that teaching me and my siblings to speak perfect English, pero al mismo tiempo hablar español perfectamente, would be something that would be important? My father, he had that vision. He knew how important that would be. So courage and vision are two other characteristics that I think, for me at least, have really propelled me into becoming this person who can adjust really easily and for whom change is not a scary thing. So I invite you to channel my parents. When you get to the point in your professional life where you think to yourself, this change, it's really a lot, and it's a lot to digest. Think of them, and think of the courage, the vision, and this idea of embracing in the new to really get past that. So I end today a little bit like I began. I told you a story about how my father was invited to come to this very city to visit a plant. 47 years and a generation later, I stand before you in Chicago, but now as a member of one of the largest and most prestigious law firms in the world. Change is good.